Hi everybody, I'm Tawanda Coleman. Welcome. It has been a tough few months. Just as we found ourselves dealing with the aftermath of the devastating March 3rd tornado that hit Middle Tennessee, the world came to a halt, and we were introduced to the harsh realities of a global pandemic. In the midst of it all, we've had to adjust from everything from quarantines, job loss, masks, social distancing, Zoom meetings, and homeschooling and working from home for the first time. There have been countless moments of uncertainty, struggles, and needs. Due to social distancing, today's show may look a little different, but the goal remains the same: to highlight the mission, services, and great works of our nonprofit organizations, many of which are needed now more than ever, and they're dealing with challenges of their own. And we're going to talk more about that with Lori Shinton, the president and CEO of Hands On Nashville. This is the Plus Side of Nashville.
From the News Channel 5 network, this is the Plus Side of Nashville.
I'm excited to learn more about how our local nonprofits are doing, and I have with me as my guest, joining me via Zoom, is Lori Shinton, who's the president and CEO of Hands On Nashville. Hi there, Lori. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me this morning.
Absolutely. This is such an interesting time in so many of our lives, in our nonprofits, who we know have been out there on the forefront whenever people needed them, helping people. And prior to the pandemic, we had that tornado that ripped through our city, and we had so many volunteers, more volunteers than I think we knew what to do with. And then the pandemic came. We had the safer at home orders, and things changed. How have our nonprofits been able to sort of weather this storm? Are they continuing to survive, or what do they need right now? What's happening with our nonprofits?
Sure. And just to put some numbers on what you just said, the 2 weeks after the tornado, we had about 30,000 people raise their hand and say, I want to volunteer.
Wow.
And then 2 weeks later, it really shut down. And so we have seen a significant drop off in volunteers. And that's purely related to safety. It's not because people don't want to get out. It's because they're worried about their safety. And so I know Hands On Nashville and many other nonprofits, as soon as COVID hit, we switched to dealing with the most significant needs. And food security absolutely is one. When schools, are out, that means a lot of hungry children. And so that's been one of the most ongoing pressing needs during this time, as well as we've switched to things like sending volunteers to the testing centers and things like that. So things directly related to COVID as well.
So much of their staff, that has not necessarily changed. They've been able to continue to keep staff. Have there been furloughs with any of our nonprofits or job losses?
I can't speak to, there have been some furloughs, absolutely. I don't think it's been across the board. I do think, like, for instance, Hands On Nashville's not had any furloughs, and I know there's several other organizations that have not, but there certainly have been furloughs. We were hit, essentially just as hard as the for-profit businesses have been. The difference for an organization like Hands On Nashville, because we were in the middle of a disaster response, we were fortunate enough to really do a lot of fundraising in the month of March, unsolicited fundraising. And so that has helped, that has allowed us to be able to continue to provide volunteer services.
That's wonderful. And I know Hands On Nashville Day was, it continued as well this year. So lots of folks were able to donate, right?
Absolutely, right. The combined disasters have continued to allow people to support us. The nonprofits that don't deal as much directly with disaster work, I think those are the ones that are really potentially struggling as corporations lose profits and furlough people, they are beginning to cut back on their philanthropy.
I see. Talk about the safety and sort of social distancing guidelines, because as you mentioned, that has been a lot of the reason why our nonprofits have had to sort of change the way they do things, because so much of what nonprofits do involve working with people.
Absolutely. So for us, we went to full remote work when the Safer at Home order went into place. So what that meant for us is that we had to pause our tornado, and mainly we do things like debris removal and things like that. We had to pause that for a good period of time. We also would only allow our partners to post critical needs. And so those are around that food security and things like that. Yeah. But nonprofits have been following the safety guidelines that the CDC and others in the mayor's office has put out from the beginning. So, the mask wearing, the social distancing, and as you know, some of that's evolved over time as we've learned more about the virus. But some are still doing very direct service. And so, they do that as safely as possible, both protecting the staff and the clients that they serve.
That's wonderful. I know we were just talking about and mentioning too, and I know a lot of people are probably curious, how are things going with our tornado victims and with that whole relief effort? Are we starting to see some progress? Is there being some rebuilds? Can you kind of bring us up to date on that?
Absolutely. So Hands On Nashville participates in the long-term recovery group for the tornado, along with several other organizations. And what's happening now is that people who have unmet needs, so, a lot of people that were damaged by the tornado, they could have hopefully applied for FEMA. Insurance is a piece of it, but then there's usually a gap. Still that doesn't cover the complete rebuild. And so the recovery group has different pieces that fit into it. There's a case management piece, and that's where they really help that homeowner or renter identify their unmet needs. And then they're connected to another group within that long-term recovery group that works on construction, repairs, and sometimes complete rebuilds. So that process is underway. Long-term recovery, just to put it into perspective, as devastating as the tornado was, it'll be an 18 to 24 month recovery. Wow. Before it's all said and done. And so COVID really interrupted that timeline. And what we're doing right now, because what Hands On Nashville is doing is circling back to homeowners and say, do you still have debris that needs to be moved out to the streets? Public Works can come get it. Because we did that for 2 weeks and then it just stopped abruptly. We have about 70 requests for debris removal right now. And so we're going to be hosting volunteer projects that are outside, mask required, social distance required, in hopes that people will feel comfortable enough to get out. And, if you have damage sitting in your yard, that's just depressing for a person.
It really
so
is.
We're really trying, so we're really trying to circle around and do that while the construction also begins. It's just a process. It doesn't happen as quickly as all of us would like it to happen, especially because of the pandemic.
Exactly. But I feel like you will get those volunteers because there's so many giving hearts. As you know, we are the volunteer state. And so there's so many
Absolutely.
people who want to help. And we don't want to forget about our tornado victims. We are in the midst of this pandemic, but there are still people who are suffering in other areas. So that's one area that we really feel like when we can make a difference. Don't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we did host one debris project a couple of weeks ago just to see if we could get folks out. And we were pleasantly surprised. Both shifts filled. And some people had so much fun the first shift, they stayed over into the second shift. That's the volunteer spirit of this state.
That really is. And that's what I love so much about this state. Everybody is so loving and giving here. We got to take a break, Lori. But when we come back, we'll talk more about our nonprofit organizations and the hands-on Nashville and how you all are still getting out there continuing your mission. So we'll be right back right after this.